Good evening. Happy Father's Day, and welcome to Talking Point. I'm your host, Dr. Corey Animbright, coming to you live from the studios of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation in Accra. We come to you live this and every Sunday with issues of national concern and engage you in discussions for informed decision-making. We are streaming live on GBC Ghana Online, on Facebook at Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, and as always, we welcome those listening to us on Unique 95.7. We are grateful to ATL for their continued sponsorship of Talking Points with their colorful ATL fabrics. Tonight's outfit was custom made by Rowena Creations using ATL fabric. You can find Rowena Creations on their Facebook or Instagram handles. The Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the Global Goals, were adopted by the UN as a universal call to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. Although a lofty goal, all member states have committed to achieving this goal by 2030. The presidents of Ghana have at different times played key roles in supporting the Secretary General, in efforts to generate momentum and commitment to achieve the SDGs by 2030. This demonstrates the key role Ghana appears to play on the global front and begs the question, how are we doing on our journey towards accomplishing the SDG goals? Tonight we will discuss what the SDGs are, the progress made so far, Ghana's position with respect to what we've been doing, and what we can do to improve our position. We encourage you to send messages during the show to our WhatsApp number 020-380-3174. Again, 020-380-3174. With me in the studios to discuss this topic are on my extreme left, Professor Fred Yamwa, Reader in Sustainability at Birkbeck, University of London, in the School of Business, Economics and Informatics, and Professor Adolf Akwe, Khalifa University of Science and Technology, UAE, and United Nations Global Environmental Outlook. So, happy Father's Day to you before we begin.
Thank you very much.
I hope you all heard from your kids. If not, they're off the Christmas list, I'm sure. So tonight's program is an opportunity for us to reflect and assess how Ghana is doing towards achieving the SDGs so far. So let's start with a broad question about what makes the SDGs so important, and why have all member states chosen to commit to achieving these goals by 2030. So I'll start with you, Professor Yamwa.
Thank you very much. The SDGs, as it has been outlined, really is a call to end poverty and hunger across the world. And it's obvious that various governments have in their own way tried to make attempts at resolving their issues at the national level. But we know with the turn of the 21st century that there's nothing that called a country in isolation. So with globalization, we are all interconnected. So it becomes quite a prominent feature under the United Nations for them to realize that with that interconnectedness, a target or a program that sits under the umbrella of the United Nations General Secretary would have the right kind of impetus and then the support from global stakeholders. I mean, we know that when it comes to development issues across the world, there are so many stakeholders involved. And if these targets are not pitched at the very highest level of decision making, then it would be business as usual, as we've seen. So it was seen as a very innovative and a profound step by the world governing body to set these targets at the level of the United Nations.
Okay. So, Professor Clay, Professor Yamwa talked about the fact that if it wasn't done by the UN, it could be business as usual.
Yeah.
But wouldn't one argue that these are fundamental, basic citizen rights that all the countries should have been striving to achieve anyway?
That may be need to be the case, but what you would realize is that these problems are local problems for every country, for every nation, and so there is some commonality within the problems that we have. Hence, they turn from local problems to global challenges. So the SDGs are in fact global challenges which are actually unique for every nation. So if you look at things like poverty, health and well-being, education, sustainable cities, sustainable production and consumption, all of these are unique to every country. So although they are local, they become global grand challenges.
Okay. So, Dr. Yamoah, here we are with global issues that are trying to be solved nationally by every country.
Yeah.
So how is Ghana doing in terms of achieving the SDGs?
That's a
And I
very
know you're a professor, so I know it won't take you 30 minutes to answer this question, though it should.
That's a very important question, and on the basis of the Sustainable Development Report, I think the most current one is 2022. Using their own indices and indicators, Ghana is not doing that well.
So I'm sure you've seen the report also in terms of what specific areas have we done well? If you can maybe talk about that.
Okay, let me give a very broad overview of some of the highlights of the report. Per the data for 2022, we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. 17. And of the 17, they are actually scored on two main dimensions. The magnitude, which can be actually classified as major challenges, significant challenges, or achieved. Of the 17, Ghana is actually classified as either significantly challenging in or major challenging in 15 out of the 17, which doesn't really bode well for us, if I say that. Only one is actually classed as achieved, which is responsible production and then consumption. Besides,
so what are the indicators? What made us get there?
Okay.
Maybe I'll ask Mr. Yamoah. What is it in, what were they looking for as indicators, and what led them to say that we have achieved that goal?
Right. I mean, for each of the 17 goals, they have specific benchmarks. So if we talk about responsible production and consumption, then obviously we are looking at the amount of food. So food security, for instance, will be a major indicator. And then when it comes to the consumption as well, we're looking at the nutrients, specific nutrients that are available, and then the level of nutritional level of the populace in general. So there are various indicators.
Okay.
So along those lines, we are seen to have done well in terms of responsible production and consumption. I think when you go forward, we had some interesting discussions about there are aspects of these that we think that for example, when it comes to waste, for instance, we think that there's still some work that needs to be done in that area. Yeah.
So when so there are two. So what's the second one?
Climate action.
I was very surprised by that, only because maybe I have misunderstood that. Because does it refer to forests and things like that, or what exactly is it talking about?
Forest refers to life on land, which we are not doing well in.
Okay, which I can understand.
That indicator, that's the only indicator in which we are not making any progress
at all.
We are actually decreasing for life on land. Climate action is actually classed as challenging, which is not as worse as significantly challenging or major challenging. Probably because our climate action has to do with the carbon emissions intensity of our energy production. You know that major part of our energy production is from biomass and then also from hydro. Biomass for local consumption in households, and then hydro for the generation of electricity. So that may account for the not so bad score when it comes to the climate action.
So let's look at life on land, which, we have things like Atiwa Forest and all little things that are really problematic, even for some of us here. The question I have is, when we decide to embrace these broad goals and commit to having local solutions to them, what happens in 2030 when progress has not been made? So we went from millennial goals to sustainable development goals. I don't know if that transition happened because goals had not been met, or new goals were promulgated. Or so what happens in 2030 when
I think already major stakeholders, including I think some of the co-chairs of this initiative at the UN level, they have really given an indication that it's not likely that we are going to achieve them. And I think at the African level, they seem to have shifted to the 2063 initiative. And in a way, COVID and the Russian-Ukraine war has also come in as kind of a sharp change to really shake the ecosystem. But certainly, 2023, not much would have been achieved. And in terms of orienting our mindset, it seemed to me that there's a bit of inertia to concede or throw in the towel now and say, let's re-strategize. So I think it will drag, and when we get there, possibly there will be any initiative. I'm sure maybe COP28 could be one such major international stage where these initiatives may come up in terms of whether they're going to stick to it until that time. But in terms of prospect, it doesn't look good.
Good. What about you, Shaka?
Okay, I think one thing which is really important to note when it comes to such global policies and agenda are the key principle underlying it. One of the key principles is continuous improvement. And so, it's, although the goals are aspirational, in that we seek to end poverty, we seek that there will be no hunger, we seek good health and well-being. These are all aspirational goals. So the aim is to make continuous the progress. Where are we now, and where would we be year on year in terms of improvement? So some countries can make significant gains in terms of, let's say, the number of points. Ghana now is scored at about 63.4%. Okay, so the question is, where do we move the next year and then the next year? So it's about continuous improvement. We may not have achieved all the goals by, let's say, 2030, but the key question is, what gains have we made? The aim is to try and work towards making gains across all the SDGs.
Okay, so when you talk about continuous improvement, and as we mentioned, some countries we have two achieved. I don't know if when you look at those two, one can tell whether or not you are anywhere near completing it. Is there a global assessment in terms of where other countries are? And maybe what I wanted, before we get to that question, I know we have some sort of graphic that we want to project and then have you speak to the project and what we are seeing. So I don't know if you want to take the opportunity to do so now, Professor Moore.
Okay, so out of the 163 countries which were assessed, Ghana was ranked 110. I personally think that although the positioning doesn't tell much of a story, the most important thing is what are the actual, or what are the specifics when it comes to each of the indicators. Of the 17 indicators, those marked or those coded as red are actually classified as major challenges. So we have major challenges in SDGs like hunger, SDG 2, health, SDG 3, gender inequality, life underwater. All of these are major challenges, 8 out of the 17. And 7 are actually ranked or coded as significant challenges. That means we're actually struggling significantly when it comes to these SDGs. Only one, like we earlier pointed out, is achieved, which is SDG 12, responsible production and then consumption. Besides the color coding, which gives the magnitude of how well we are doing, there is also the direction in terms of progress. Progress. Okay, so if you look at the screen very well, we have some arrows which are diagonal, some which are horizontal, and some which are going upwards, and one which is going downwards. I would start with the one going downwards, which is life and land. If you delve into what constitutes life on land, it's unsurprising to many of you, I think, that deforestation is a key part of it, and we all know what is actually causing deforestation in Ghana. There are marginal progress in terms of gains, in terms of improvements, which are the diagonals, and then there is one as well, which is saying, there are 6 which are actually stagnating. Which are the horizontal arrows. Okay. So I would urge those who are interested to know more about how well Ghana is doing in terms of the detail, to visit the UN Sustainable Development Goals Index Dashboard, and the SDG Index Dashboard, and you can be able to get to know more about it.
Okay, so Professor Yamoh, here we are. One, we've done very well. Well, maybe I should say we have achieved. The others were in various stages, and some we are not doing so well, stagnated or actually gone lower. So in your views, what sort of measures should we take, or pathways should we follow to improve some of these scores that we saw?
Sure. I mean, thanks for that question. I mean, it's something that, like Adolf said, we're seeking progressively to do better or be better. But I think it calls for a more deliberate sort of approach, because I'm sure some of our viewers may be very new to these indicators being out there. So if the typical Ghanaian is not very much aware that we undergoing such an assessment and we are being assessed on the basis of what we are doing, then it calls for a kind of a policy intervention where stakeholders, so here we're looking at a kind of a triad where we look at the government sitting at the apex, being connected to industry, and then academia on the right, and then the general citizenry being in the middle, where there will be kind of well-coordinated programs and activities. And I think we did a bit of background search that if anybody wants to know what is happening with the Sustainable Development Goals as far as Ghana is concerned, what we found was an advisory unit under the presidency. And you look at the program that has been outlined there, and yes, there are one-off activities that really has the kind of reflection on these indicators. If you take government levels, you don't find a lot of signposting as to, if you are interested to know about how we're doing on life on land, where do you go? And as you can see, these are also multi-sectoral. So within government ministries, where are these sort of situated? For, let's say, a typical research student who wants to find information, where do you go? So I think in as much as we've had co-chair of these important UN initiatives, I think we need to do more in terms of making it more visible in terms of the connections, it may take time, but we have to be deliberate about it to be able to connect industry and then connect government and also connect academia. I mean, the question is how many of our academic institutions are directly feeding in and then feeding back as far as these initiatives are concerned. It could be if we had a whole kind of a project line or a department in charge of this, I think that would be a laudable idea. So there's more that we can do to make it more visible. And I'm sure that level of visibility will indicate our kind of commitment to it.
You know, in Nigeria, I mean, a late former colleague of mine, Professor Ibero Wundiwe, he founded an organization or a journal called Analytics, already Analytics Research and Development Initiative, when they had funding for the Ford Foundation. And one of the publications they had was the SDG Monitor. And what they were doing was tracking Nigeria's progress towards achieving the SDGs. So from what you're saying, we don't have anything similar. And this was an individual who took it upon himself, got funding and was able to do that. Is this something academia should be looking at more closely? Professor Okoye, do you think, and see how, you know, because not everything has to emanate from the government. And maybe in some cases, when it's an assessment, it might even be better that it's someone or an entity that is detached. What are your thoughts?
Yes, very true, because there is a saying that what is not measured cannot be managed. So measurements in terms of having data and monitoring, not just monitoring, but monitoring, reporting becomes really important. So I would urge that a lot more goes into monitoring what has been done and seeing the actual progress which we are making.
So, staying also on the monitoring, in 2020, Nigeria was part of the Voluntary National Review, the high-level political forum on SDGs. And they focused on the key issues of poverty, SDG 1, inclusive economy, SDG 8, health and well-being, SDG 3, education, SDG 4, gender equality, 5, and then enabling the environment for peace and security. And then I also think that there's something called partnerships. Have we ever been part of such a voluntary national review?
Yes.
And when was that, and how did we fare?
Yes, we had our voluntary national review report published in 2019. It is available online, so those who are interested can be able to go and read it. I've actually forgotten the name of the author. Is one professor. He was an MP member of parliament as well as minister for local government, I think. It was actually published under the office of the president. So we have also done the review, just as Nigeria has done, highlighting aspects of the 17 goals that we are working on. So yes, yeah.
All right, so Professor Yama, so Nigeria's review was based on the country's development priorities and the development objectives of the former president, that was Buhari for Nigeria. Was ours based on something similar?
Yes, I mean, and like I said, we have been co-chair, so it's something that I think it comes quite natural that we, seeming to be taking up bigger roles at the UN level. Yes, we do those things. But if you look at the typical reporting lines, what I would envisage, I mean, that we could encourage would be a better way of signposting what is being achieved. And I know that when it comes to academics, these days some work are being done where you are asked to point out which of the SDGs that you're targeting, especially when you're applying for funding that relates to development issues. I mean, I went through a program with KNUST up in the forestry department where we looked at women and their kind of engagement within the cocoa sector, providing an alternative livelihood during off-season. And obviously, so we had a publication with the environmental development And they really pointed out, okay, which of these are you really trying to address? I think if we have that kind of indicator, that will help, so that everybody can chip in and know that, okay, what I'm doing is resolving this or resolving,
Okay. All right. Well, this is GBC. You're watching Talking Points. Please stay with us. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Talking Points on GBC GTV. We are talking tonight about achieving Ghana's global sustainable development goals. In the studio with me on my extreme left, Professor Fred Yamo, Leader in Sustainability at Birkbeck, University of London, School of Business, Economics and Informatics. And on my immediate left is Professor Adolf Akwe, Khalifa University of Science and Technology, UAE, and United Nations Global Environmental Outlook. So before the break, we were talking about these goals, how we are doing in terms of achieving them. And if I am watching, I'm thinking, what do they have? What relevance do they have for and to me? So Professor Yamo, for the ordinary Ghanaian, how can you break down the relevance of some of these things to them?
Okay, I mean, if we start with the collective, I mean, the kind of the totality, there are indices like life expectancy, for instance, that could be directly connected to the level to which countries are making progress, because there's a lot of implication on health, resilience in terms of how we're able to relate to climate emergencies. I mean, there are some regular annual issues with flooding, for instance, in Accra. So these gives kind of indicators on the whole. So when we see people carrying their belongings because they're really strengthening, we could relate to the fact that we are not meeting these SDGs in the right way.
What about you, Prof? Do you have any?
I would add that if you look particularly at these 17 SDGs, zero poverty, no hunger, health and well-being, education, sustainable cities. These are problems staring us in the face. So it's very, very relevant to every Ghanaian. These are local problems which would need local solutions. Besides the fact that we could also learn from countries which are actually doing better at managing this problem. So the SDGs is an evidence of our problems that we face day to day as Ghanaians.
So one other country in Ghana, in Africa, has taken the steps to align their national planning to the SDG. And it included an ongoing realignment of the national statistical system with requirements and indicators of the SDG. Now, how important would you think it would be for us to take a similar step?
Yes, if you read the voluntary national review report for Ghana, that point is made exactly in the report that we not just need to align but we need to integrate. So we need to think of the SDGs as strategic objectives. Strategic objectives, it's like a company with strategic objectives. You do things in order to meet those strategic objectives. So if as a country, our national development plan is integrated with the SDGs to ensure that there is no hunger, there is zero poverty, there is climate action, there is life on land and all those, it means that we can then better be able to put in place measures and programs in order to ensure that we achieve these goals. The question is, it's not just about we saying that we need to align and integrate the SDGs into the National Development Plan, which has been made in the report. But what measures, what lessons are we taking in order to ensure that, yes, this is done?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you, Professor Yammor. So we have put this in the voluntary review document. But what evidence do we have that both on the statistical level and in the national planning, these have been somewhat incorporated into what we do since we did that in 2019?
Yes, I think there's some kind of realigning, but some kind of misalignment in terms of the way the country captures some of these developmental issues, because we should be interested in what happens beneath the headline figures. Because, I mean, once it's at the national level, everything is kind of accumulated. We know within Ghana, when it comes to poverty, it's not kind of homogeneous. So you see that it would be even good that if we're able to disaggregate these things to go to regional, district, and local levels, because the emphasis that we may need to place on, let's say, SDG 1 may be different when we are looking at policy at the Greater Accra region, or even within districts within Greater Accra region, different emphasis needs to be laid. So in a way, I see that writing about aligning and even producing the indicators is fine. But if we want to take this more seriously, then fundamentally, maybe we'll have to find a way of coordinating that with traditionally how we measure our progress. But I think that if you pick any ministry and you want them to account for what they're doing, they'll be able to give indicators. So the question is, where does that situate in terms of these SDGs? And I must also underline that these SDGs will not sit under just one. So there are kind of connections and combinations. So we have to figure out how, as a country, we will be able to cascade these things to ministerial level sectors so that we know how we feed in, and everyone who is participating will also be clear where we are contributing to. And this is why I said earlier on that we have to be very deliberate if we want to make more progress.
Yeah, and it could even be that there are things that have been done, but they haven't been captured anywhere to be able to send us a reporting benchmark for improvement in the scores that we currently have. Did you want to add anything to what we said?
Yes. In terms of the how, one thing we need to know is that these SDGs are all interconnected. And what are the things which will drive the achievement of SDGs? One of them are policies, governmental policies. So one thing I would recommend for Ghana is to have what you can call a policy watchdog. What do I mean by policy watchdog? If you take any country like Ghana, any policy which is implemented, any good, thoughtful policy which is implemented has feedback. Those feedback can be positive, meaning that it is beneficial for its intended purpose, or the feedback can be negative. So what policy watchdogs can be able to do is to do a critical examination of ongoing policies or policies which are also yet to be implemented, to know what are the negative feedbacks of those policies in order to ensure that whilst we are actually targeting SDG 3 as an example, health, it may impact negatively on something else. So I would say I would actually call for a policy watchdog where there will be very critical viewpoints, not views which would go with the flow. Dissenting views can be good. If you look at economics school of thought, there are different school of thought which sometimes would conflict. Okay, so examining policies which we implement to highlight negative feedback is actually really important, and I think that having independent apolitical watchdog to review and assess policies would be in the right direction.
Okay, so we see the goals for the SDGs, eradicating poverty, equality, all great things, and I mentioned in the introduction that one would even call them lofty goals, because somebody is sitting there saying that I need with the bread and butter, and so the funding or funding of the countries are going towards other things that are deemed to be more important. So the question I have is overall, are there any support systems, funding or programs that the UN is providing to some countries to support their progress towards the SDGs, or because these are all local issues that all of us have, the countries are supposed to find their own ways of solving them?
Yes. There was, or let me say there is, funding that was kind of dedicated, but there's a huge funding gap. I think it was agreed in Paris, but that was the duty of our developed counterpart. But as we speak, there's a big gap in that funding, and it looks like they have different priorities. So I think at COP 26 or 26, the African leadership really had a meeting on the side to present one front in terms of the message to our partners in the developed world that without that funding flowing through, it will be very difficult for countries individually to borrow on their own terms to fund these important activities. And on that score, in terms of what we're doing and what we can do, I also think that beyond the direct issues that has implications for these objectives, it's really important that the general population must also be carried along, because there's a need, I think, if you look at some of the attitudes and then behaviors that generally we put across, we must start challenging the mindsets, prevailing mindsets, to bring all the other people together, because if the populists are left behind, then really at the top level we can have the best policies, the best programs, but they wouldn't see the need to really be part of it, because values that we hold and then an understanding that we have about ourselves and about well-being becomes very important, and that has to feed, especially for us to achieve a lot of these bothersome behavior change.
Okay, just to add to what Professor Yemo said, besides the actual support from the international community, the SDG advisory group, the advisory unit in Ghana actually set up what they call the SDG, the CEO advisory group, with the aim that corporate funds would actually flow into a green fund and also a delivery fund, with the intention that these funds can be used to actually support SDG goals. I would say that it's a good initiative from corporate Ghana, but it needs to be scaled up, because in a good thing which is not scaled up would not have the impact that we actually want.
Okay, so I'm going to just talk to you about this article I saw. It was written by 5, I think, academics. The topic is Assuming Accuracy, Pretending Influence, Risk of Measuring, Monitoring, and Reporting Sustainable Development Goals. And they were basically talking about how sustainability assessments and reports often express a desire to inform, but the approach is challenged by the complexity of the sustainability challenges, patching knowledge and different values and interests by both the experts and the lay people. And this is what it says. Despite our efforts, sustainability reporting has so far largely failed in achieving its core mission to inspire and ignite a transformative global change leading to sustainable development. As shown by inadequate responses to climate threats, societies still have limited capacities to implement science-based recommendations on how to solve comprehensive societal issues. So my question for you is that here we are focusing on the diversity of risk perceptions when it comes to sustainability reporting. So we're talking specifically on the UN Agenda 2030. What strategies do you think we should use to improve the risk management throughout this journey, and also ensure that some of these issues that are raised, because we want to do all these things, we have these benchmarks, and so when you take the benchmark, you've done well, but really fundamentally, is there really going to be a change happening?
Yes. If we pick industry, who are a very important stakeholders, to an extent, there's still not the general belief that there is a business case for sustainability. So you could see that corporate social responsibility seemed to have been firmly embraced. But the question then is, are they coming from the point of view of compliance? Is it being driven by public image, or is driven by sustainability imperatives? So we need to do a bit more, from academic point of view, for instance. And there's even evidence to indicate that there's some corporate sustainability greenwashing that goes on there, in the sense that, yes, they have very good corporate statements about sustainability and why they cherish it, but in terms of practice, it doesn't really happen. Obviously, yes, measurement is a big challenge, because when it comes to indicators, in trying to measure them, there are no kind of omnibus or standardized way of measuring. And when it comes to measurement as well, there are individual approaches that they in itself comes to a particular result. So in doing typical analysis, it becomes quite difficult to say that, okay, we have to go with A or we have to go with B. But all being said and done, I also think that when we involve sustainability training and bringing people in, there could be practical means that individuals can also be encouraged to either take care of their carbon footprint. When it comes to walking, for instance, it should be maybe, when you talk about sustainable cities, for instance, it may be time for us to look at our planning such that people may be able to assess important necessities within a walking distance. In that way, people may not have to drive all the time, and that would be, so that could be also practical. Despite the challenges of the measurement, we could also even see improvement in our health by way of maybe doing more walking, cutting down back on maybe how much meat we eat, and going on more to plant-based sort of diet.
Let's look at it from a practical standpoint. So I think one of the SDGs we have met is the one that had to do with food scarcity.
Responsible
production and consumption,
which included something about food scarcity. Now, probably not too long ago, one of the ministries was selling yam because yam wasn't available. So when we say we've met this, and yet on the ground we see some of these issues, the question becomes, the benchmarks that we have to achieve these things, are they superficial in some way, or are they really grounded in facts on the ground that preclude us from seeing these things that almost appear to be a disconnect?
Right.
I would say that we have the 17 broad indicators. However, we have 169 targets. So each of the SDGs have multiple sub targets that we would have to meet. So responsible production and consumption also has indicators that has to do with emissions in terms of production of goods and services, consumption-related emissions and stuff. Okay, so there are different indicators which adds or cumulatively added together to get the aggregate which is scored as achieved significant challenging or major challenging.
Okay, and then I said yam, but it was really plantain, and, and it was actually being sold by the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. So let me just correct that. So a couple of questions have come in. I want to start with you, Professor Yamoah. This says, Goal 8 speaks of decent work, economic growth, and Goal 2, gender equality. How can your panel comment on them, and how can we marry the SDG goals to political party manifesto promises come the 2024 elections? And this is from Alhaji Dawuda from Medina Estate.
I think that's a brilliant question. I mean, it's very timely. And then the next question I ask myself is, beyond today, who would spearhead that to take it to the political parties in terms of making this a core election sort of issue? Because we know that my reading and listening to commentary when it comes to how we are performing badly in terms of life on land, it appears that we have given. And when I heard of the National Tree Planting Day, I mean, it was really kind of paradoxical that on one hand we are planting trees, on one hand we seem to have lost control as far as illegal mining is concerned. I mean, does that mean covertly we have given up to indicate that yes, let them explore, let them waste the land, and maybe we'll try and then follow their track by planting new trees? So like I was saying, in terms of that question, it would be very, very, very pleasant to me, and maybe for Fakwe, if this could be a major kind of manifesto issue. I think that brings in the bigger picture of where Ghana is when it comes to the development agenda. The last time I heard of the National Planning Commission, I think was many years back, where they came up with I think it's 40-year program. That was the end of that. Now, here's the question I also mentioned, I think issue to do with gender and then the work. I think the work side is very critical, and that really centers around the tendency for us to go to our breaking point. Because if we look at the statistics, most of our population belong to the youthful group, and it's now clear that youth unemployment is a big issue. So when you talk about decent work and economic progress, that is an area that maybe on the back of trying to achieve these goals, we may need to begin to look at which of these programs and projects can we, in quote, monetize. I mean, there are a few initiatives across the world when it comes to this carbon trading, which is going on now. I think East Africa seem to be in the lead in terms of people planting trees to cover and then being paid for planting trees. So maybe there are things that we should be looking at, so we solve two problems, right? So in as much as we make the environment better, we also have that be an avenue to also create jobs for the team in youth. And on the youth side as well, there's a bit of knowledge skill imbalance in terms of what they get at the school level in terms of universities. And that is something that maybe from the National Accreditation Board level or Ministry of Education, we may need to maybe introduce another tier where institutions that qualify for government funding must also be asked to look at employability as a way of receiving maybe continued support. Because if we are churning them out with very good cognitive prowess, but we know that out there the jobs are not there to absorb them, they'll have a problem. So I'm talking to you, but let me touch a bit on the gender angle. Gender angle, I think the examples that are around, especially in Africa, points to some deliberate action on the side of the country to really put the gender issue right at the top. that there's been, interestingly, research finding that indicates that even when it comes to lending to people, females tend to be more diligent in terms of paying back what they borrow. And it was interesting that in the paper that we did for, we published, I think, about a year ago, it came out clearly that gender construction concept really applies. Yeah. So I'm for affirmative action. I'm for maybe even giving a percentage of our representatives in Parliament to be sure that women occupy. I mean, we're having a chat and somebody said, let's try the top 4 people in Ghana being all women, and maybe that would be a game changer.
Okay, so the other question is, good evening to your panelists. I want to know Ghana's position in terms of implementation of SDG 14, which is life below water, if I'm correct. Does the country have data on this, and where can such data be found?
I would refer the one who sent the question to look at the UN SDG Index dashboard. There is a page for Ghana where all the targets, all the 169 targets for the 17 indicators are detailed. And there is also a time series, so you could be able to track how well we've done, not just for this year, but also for the past years.
So I know that the gender equality, there was a big deal made out of it when the current president assumed power, and the fact that there were a lot of women in his government, as one indicator. How are we doing on that one? I mean, where are we? Are we stagnated? Are we growing? Or do you know how we are doing in terms of that one, that specific global?
We may have to
gender.
Refer to the data.
Okay.
But the score does not just relate to, let's say, the number of women ministers that we have. It also includes things like opportunity. Are there equal opportunity for female as much as male? All of these come together to form.
Right, but I thought that maybe if they have 5 indicators, we could have achieved 1, and we have 4 more to go. So that's what I was saying in terms of maybe, because there was a lot of first about that, out there having a lot of women in the cabinet. And we know one of the countries, Rwanda, who has a very strong number. That's also one of the things that people tout. So that's where I was going generally in terms of if there are 5 indices, is this one of them, and have we struck that out completely, and what's next?
It would be interesting to zoom in on that and see the actual detail.
Well, this is exciting, but we're almost running out of time. So I'm going to give both of you about a minute or so to just give your final thoughts about it. So,
I would say that if, as a country, we want transformative, inclusive, and more equitable form of development, we really need to integrate sustainable development goals into our national planning agenda. And as I actually sign off, I would like to wish my dad, Mr. Peter Akwe, family of Viari, Kusongwe and Accra, a very happy Father's Day.
Oh, all right. Mozayamo.
I do likewise. So to retired Bishop Samson Yamoa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, okay. In Kumasi. Daddy, happy Father's Day. I think my final words will center around the call for action, because if you look at the issue to do with the youth unemployment, and then the number of incidents with African youth crossing the Mediterranean, it becomes quite a critical stage in our history that whatever we do or whatever we don't do will really determine the course of history moving on from here. So either we are able to embrace the current challenge and then change course and try to make progress, or we will be kind of welcoming wholeheartedly a challenge where there will be difficulty in managing our affairs in terms of keeping peace and security in the levels that we want. So I mean, for the future, we cannot sit and say we are not going to do anything. We have to do something, and I think it's time for us to take action.
Okay, so thank you to both of you, and thank you for joining us on tonight's Talking Point. A special thank you to my in-studio guest, Professor Fred Yamwa, Reader, Sustainability at Birkbeck University of London, School of Business, Economics and Informatics, and Professor Adolf Akwe, Khalifa University of Science and Technology, UAE, and United Nations Global Outlook, Environmental Outlook. Again, happy Father's Day to everyone, and a special happy Father's Day to the director of the show, the stage, floor hands, and everyone in the studio here with us who man the cameras that allow us to bring you the show each and every week. Happy Father's Day. I'm Dr. Nimait, and this has been Talking Points. Thank you again for spending your Sunday with us. As always, please be and take care. Till next week.